My heart pounded as I stood in the doorway of that cold, sprawling Charleston mansion, staring down a room full of Matt's family. His mother Margaret with her tight-lipped smile, his father Robert with his clenched jaw, and his sister Julia smirking like she'd already won. They slid a folder across the coffee table, divorce papers with my name on them, and Robert's voice cut through the silence. "Sign these, Lynn, or you'll regret it." I let out a sharp laugh, my pulse racing with a mix of fury and triumph, and reached into my bag. "Funny you should say that," I said, tossing my own folder onto the table, "because I've got a surprise of my own." Matt's father flipped it open, his face turning crimson, and Julia gasped as the room went dead silent. They thought they'd ambushed me, but they had no idea I'd been ready for this moment for months. "My name's Lynn Tran. I'm 29, Vietnamese born, and I've been in the U.S. for 5 years since marrying Matt, a sweet but clueless software engineer from South Carolina. I'm not the type to back down. I learned that growing up in Hanoi, where you either adapt or get trampled. Moving to America wasn't easy. I traded bustling street markets for quiet suburbs, and my sharp edges didn't always fit with Matt's polished family. They tolerated me at best, and I tolerated them right back, but I never imagined they'd stoop this low. It started with a text from Julia a week ago, blunt and suspicious. "Family meeting, Sunday, 3 p.m., Mom's house. Don't tell Matt. It's a surprise." My gut twisted the second I read it. Julia never texted me unless it was to nitpick something I'd done. My cooking wasn't Southern enough, or I didn't smile right at Thanksgiving. So I showed it to my best friend Claire over coffee the next day, her hazel eyes narrowing as she sipped her latte. "This reeks," Claire said, tapping her nails on the table. "A family meeting without Matt? They're either planning a cult ritual or screwing you over." I smirked, but my stomach churned. Claire's a freelance hacker, brilliant, nosy, and fiercely loyal. She'd sniffed out dirt for me before, like when my old boss tried to stiff me on overtime. "Dig for me," I told her, sliding my phone over. "I need to know what I'm walking into." She grinned, cracking her knuckles. "Give me 48 hours. Sunday rolled around and I drove to Margaret and Robert's house alone, the kind of place that screamed old money. High ceilings, mahogany furniture, but the paint was peeling in corners, a hint their fortune wasn't what it used to be. I dressed sharp, black blazer, jeans, boots, because if I was walking into a trap, I'd damn well look good doing it. The air hit me like a wall when I stepped inside. Every eye in the room locked on me. Robert sat stiff in his armchair, Margaret perched on the couch, Julia slouched with her arms crossed, and even Matt's aunt and uncle from Georgia were there, looking smug. A folder sat on the coffee table like a loaded gun. "Sit down," Margaret said, her voice icy despite the southern drawl. I stayed put, arms crossed, my boots rooted to the hardwood. "I'll stand," I replied, scanning their faces. Robert sat stiff in his armchair, his knuckles whitening around the armrests. Margaret perched on the couch with her hands folded too tightly. Julia slouched with that smug little smirk I'd come to loathe, and even Matt's Aunt Linda and Uncle George from Georgia were there, their eyes glinting with something between pity and triumph. A folder rested on the coffee table, its edges crisp, like it had been prepared with care. Robert picked it up and slid it toward me, his tone flat, like he was firing an employee. "We need you to sign these," he said. "It's for the best." I stepped closer, peeked at the top page, and my breath caught. Divorce papers, already filled out, Matt's name next to mine in stark black ink. My chest tightened, a hot flush of anger rising up my throat, but I forced a laugh, letting it echo in the tense silence. "You're kidding, right?" Margaret's lips twitched, her diamond earrings catching the light as she tilted her head. "We've thought this through, Lynn," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "You're not a good fit for this family. You don't understand our ways, and frankly, you're dragging Matthew down." Julia snorted, crossing her arms tighter, her manicured nails digging into her sleeves. "Don't act shocked," she said, her tone sharp. "You've been a leech since day one. We're just cutting you loose." My pulse hammered in my ears, their words slicing through me like dull knives, but I kept my face steady, my eyes darting from one to the next. They weren't just suggesting I leave, they were staging a coup, and they thought I'd roll over. "Where's Matt?" I asked, my voice low but firm, cutting through their sanctimonious little script. Robert shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "He's not here," he said gruffly. "We're sparing him the stress." I raised a hand, my fingers trembling slightly, not from fear but from the fury bubbling under my skin. "Let me get this straight," I said, stepping closer to the table. "You dragged me here, drafted divorce papers behind his back, and you expect me to sign them just because you say it's for the best?" Margaret's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing. "We know what's right for our son," she said. "You never have." That's when the door to the kitchen swung open, and a new face stepped in, Mrs. Ellie Hawkins, the Thompsons' housekeeper of 20 years, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her apron still dusted with flour. She froze, her wide eyes flicking between me and the family, a tray of iced tea trembling in her hands. "Oh, I didn't mean to," she stammered, but Robert waved her off sharply. "Not now, Ellie. Leave it and go." She set the tray down, her movements jerky, and I caught the quick glance she threw my way, nervous, almost apologetic, my gut twisted. Ellie knew something, and they didn't want her here. I smirked, reaching into my bag, my fingers brushing the thick folder I'd carried in. "Well," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade, "if we're doing surprises, I've got one too." I tossed my folder onto the table, the thud loud in the stifling silence, and watched their faces shift. Margaret's composure faltered, Robert's eyes narrowed, Julia's smirk vanished. Robert snatched it up, flipping through the pages, his breath hitching as he scanned the lines. "What the hell is this?" he growled, his voice shaking with something dark. Anger, yes, but fear too. Julia lunged for a page, her nails scraping the paper as she yanked it free, her face paling. "How did you—" she started, but her words died in her throat. "Proof," I said, crossing my arms, my heart pounding with a strange, wild thrill. "Bank records, emails, hidden transfers. I've known for months your family's been draining Matt dry. Business flops, shady loans, Julia's little shopping sprees. I was just waiting for the right moment to drop this bomb." Robert's hands shook, the papers crinkling under his grip. "This is fake," he spat, but his voice cracked, betraying him. "There's no way you—" I tilted my head, my grin widening. "Then why's your face redder than a tomato?" Margaret snatched the folder from him, her fingers trembling as she skimmed the pages, her lips parting in a silent gasp. Julia's eyes darted to her parents, her bravado crumbling, and Uncle George, who'd been silent, leaned forward, his voice gruff. "Robert, what's she talking about?" Robert didn't answer, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. Margaret looked up at me, her face ashen, her voice barely a whisper. "You have no idea what you've done, Lynn." I leaned in, my voice low and sharp. "Oh, I think I do." The front door banged open, and Matt stumbled in, his brown hair tousled, his eyes wide with confusion. "Mom? You said there was some—" He stopped dead, taking in the scene. Me standing tall, his family in disarray, two folders splayed across the table like battle plans. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tight. Margaret shot to her feet, her hands fluttering. "Matthew, sweetheart, sit down, we'll explain." I cut her off, stepping forward, my boots clicking on the floor. "No, Matt, you sit. Your family tried to ambush me with divorce papers behind your back, but they didn't see this coming." I tapped my folder, my chest swelling with grim satisfaction. "Look at it." Matt hesitated, his hazel eyes flicking between me and his parents. Then he grabbed the papers, his fingers fumbling as he flipped through them. His breath caught, a sharp, pained sound, and his hands tightened on the pages. "Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. "What is this?" Robert stared at the floor, his silence damning. "Mom," Matt said louder, his voice rising, "tell me this isn't real." Margaret wouldn't meet his gaze, her hands twisting in her lap. I stepped closer, my voice cold and steady. "It's real, Matt. Your dad's been siphoning your accounts for years, failed investments covering Julia's debts. And this," I pointed to a page, "they used our house as collateral for one of their scams. It defaulted. We almost lost everything." Matt's face drained of color, his hands shaking as he flipped faster, his breathing uneven. "You did what?" he choked out, staring at Robert. His father's jaw twitched, but he said nothing, his silence a wall. I pressed on, my anger fueling every word. "They made me the villain, Matt, while they bled you dry. They wanted me gone before I could tell you." Julia snapped, her voice shrill. "That's a damn lie." I turned to her, unfazed, and pulled a stack of printed messages from my bag, tossing them onto the table. "Oh yeah? Explain these, Julia. Texting your friend about how easy it was to trick Matt into signing papers he didn't read. I've got screenshots, transfers, everything." Julia's face went crimson, her mouth opening and closing like she'd been slapped. She started, but I didn't let her finish. I've got it all, Matt. They're not just entitled, they're criminals. Robert slammed his fist on the table, the sound rattling the iced tea glasses Ellie had left. Enough, he roared, his voice shaking the room. I met his glare, my pulse racing but my stance firm. No, you don't get to stop this. Then the kitchen door creaked again, and Ellie poked her head out, her eyes wide with panic. Mr. Thompson, there's someone at the back. Robert cut her off, his voice a snarl. I said go, Ellie. But before she could retreat, another figure pushed past her, a skinny guy in a leather jacket, his hair slicked back, a nervous grin on his face. Julia, he said, his voice shaky. You called me? Julia's head snapped up, her eyes wild. Derek? What the hell are you doing here? I grinned, stepping aside to let him stumble into the room. Oh, I called him, I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. Well, technically Claire did. She's good at finding people. Derek blinked, his hands fidgeting. Julia, what's going on? You said... Julia lunged toward him, her voice a hiss. Shut up, Derek! But Matt was already on his feet, his face twisting with realization. Derek, he said, his voice low and dangerous. The guy you said was just a friend? Derek backed up, his grin fading. Whoa, man, I don't know what's happening here. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and a file Claire had sent me flashed up. Bank records, wire transfers, payments from Julia to Derek, all laid bare. You don't? I said, holding it up. Then why's Julia been funneling Matt's money to you? Matt grabbed the phone, his eyes scanning the numbers, his breath hitching again. Julia, he said, his voice breaking, you stole from me for him? Derek raised his hands, his voice pitching higher. I didn't know it was your money, man. She said it was hers. Julia's face went white, her hands balling into fists. You idiot, she spat at Derek, but the damage was done. Robert turned on her, his voice a low growl. Is this true? Julia yanked away from his glare, her silence screaming guilt. Then a sharp knock echoed from the front door, and before anyone could move, it swung open. Detective Harris strode in, his trench coat flapping, a battered suitcase in one hand. Sorry to crash the party, Lynn, he said, his voice dry, but traffic was hell. Robert bristled, his face a mask of fury. Who are you? Harris dropped the suitcase onto the floor, popping it open to reveal stacks of documents and grainy photos. Private investigator, he said, his grin sharp. And this is proof you've been laundering money through shell companies for 3 years. The IRS is going to love it. Margaret shrieked, her hands flying to her chest. We did nothing wrong. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Then why'd you sign off on selling our house, Margaret? Matt spun to her, his voice cracking. You what? Harris pulled out a photo, Robert shaking hands with a shady figure in a dimly lit parking lot. And here's your dad with a wanted real estate crook, Harris said, tossing it onto the table. Good luck with that in court. Robert's hands gripped the table, his knuckles white, his face a storm of rage and panic. Matt looked at me, his eyes hollow. How long have you known? I shrugged, my voice calm despite the chaos. Months. I waited for the right shot. Julia lunged at me, her nails flashing, but Robert grabbed her arm, yanking her back. Enough, he bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. Derek edged toward the door, muttering, I'm out of here. But Harris blocked him, his tone casual. Not so fast, pal. You're in those records too. Derek froze, his face crumpling, and I almost felt sorry for him, almost. Matt sank into a chair, his head in his hands, muttering, Jesus Christ. I nudged the pen toward him, my voice steady. Sign it, Matt. Let's end this. He stared at the pen, his hands trembling, then at his family, Margaret sobbing into her hands, Robert seething, Julia glaring, Derek shrinking. He picked it up, his breath ragged, and signed, the scratch of the pen loud in the silence. Robert exhaled, a sharp, furious sound. You'll regret this, he spat. I smiled, grabbing Matt's hand. We'll see. I pulled him toward the door, my papers tucked under my arm, leaving their world in ruins. Outside, the March wind hit my face, sharp and clean. Matt stopped, his voice soft. I'm sorry, Lynn. I didn't see it. I handed him the divorce papers. Sign these too. We're done. He nodded, scrawling his name, then looked up, his eyes lost. What now? I grinned, my heart light. Now, I burn it all down. I climbed into my car, dialed Claire, and watched Matt walk away, a man unmoored but finally free. Outside, the March wind hit my face, sharp and clean, cutting through the haze of anger and adrenaline still buzzing in my veins. Matt stopped beside me, his shoulders slumped, his breath fogging in the chilly air. "I'm sorry, Lynn," he said, his voice soft, cracked, like a man waking from a long, bad dream. I didn't see it. I handed him the divorce papers, my fingers steady despite the wild thump of my heart. "Sign these too," I said. "We're done." He looked at me, his hazel eyes clouded with guilt and something else, relief maybe, then took the pen and scrawled his name, the ink bleeding slightly on the page. He handed them back, his voice barely a whisper. "What now?" I grinned, a fierce, untamed thing. Now, I burn it all down. I climbed into my car, dialed Claire, and watched Matt walk away, his silhouette shrinking against the gray sky. A man unmoored, finally free, but lost in a way I couldn't fix. The engine hummed as I pulled away, the Thompson mansion fading in my rearview mirror, its peeling paint and grand columns looking smaller, sadder than ever. My phone buzzed. Claire, her voice crackling with excitement. "You okay? How'd it go?" I laughed, a raw, jagged sound. "Better than okay. They're crumbling." Matt signed. "Now it's time for phase 2. She whooped, the sound muffled by the clatter of her keyboard. "Good. I've got more dirt. Email chains between Robert and some shady developer, plus Julia's latest wire to Derek. Want me to send it to Harris?" My grip tightened on the wheel, a thrill shooting through me. "Yeah, and copy it to someone else. Tessa Rhodes." Claire paused, then chuckled. "The reporter from the Charleston Post? Damn, you're ruthless." I smirked. "They started this war. I'm ending it." Tessa Rhodes was a name I'd kept in my back pocket for weeks, a sharp-tongued investigative journalist who'd been sniffing around Robert's failing real estate empire for months. I'd met her once at a coffee shop, her dark eyes glinting with hunger when I'd dropped a vague hint about trouble in the Thompson family. Now, she'd get the full feast. I pulled over at a gas station, the neon sign flickering in the dusk, and emailed her the first batch. Bank records, photos, Harris's grainy shots of Robert with that crook. My message was short. "You wanted a story. Here's your front page. Call me." My phone rang 5 minutes later, Tessa's voice sharp and eager. "Lynn, this is gold. How deep does it go?" I leaned back, my chest light with savage joy. "Deeper than you think. Meet me tomorrow. Bring a recorder." The next day, I sat across from Tessa in a dingy diner on the edge of town, the smell of burnt coffee thick in the air. She slid into the booth, her short black hair tucked behind her ears, a notebook already open. "Talk," she said, her pen poised. I pushed a USB drive across the table, my voice steady. "Robert's been laundering money through fake companies. Margaret signed off on using our house, Matt's and mine, as collateral for a loan that tanked. Julia's been skimming cash for her boyfriend Derek, who's probably halfway to Florida by now. It's all there. Dates, amounts, signatures." Tessa's eyes widened, her pen flying across the page. "You've got proof?" I nodded. "Harris has more, and the IRS is already circling thanks to him." She whistled low. "This'll bury them. You sure you want it public?" I leaned forward, my voice cold. "I want them to choke on it." Within 48 hours, the story hit. Front page of the Charleston Post, bold headline screaming, "Thompson Dynasty implodes, fraud, theft, and family betrayal." Tessa didn't hold back, detailing Robert's shell companies, Margaret's forged signatures, Julia's embezzlement, all backed by the documents I'd fed her. My phone buzzed nonstop, Claire laughing, Harris confirming the IRS raid on Robert's office, even a stunned text from Matt. "They're done, I can't believe it." I didn't reply. I was too busy watching the fallout unfold on the diner's TV, the news anchor's voice crisp. "Authorities have seized the Thompson family home after evidence of financial misconduct surfaced. Robert Thompson faces multiple charges, including fraud and money laundering." The camera panned to Margaret, her face crumpled as she hurried past reporters, her designer coat flapping in the wind. I sipped my coffee, a slow smile spreading across my face. Julia's arrest came next, a week later. I got the call from Harris while I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment, a cozy one-bedroom downtown, paid for with my share of the divorce settlement. They picked her up at a motel, he said, his voice dry with amusement. She was screaming about you the whole time, called you a vindictive witch. Derek's gone, by the way, left her high and dry. I laughed, setting a framed photo of me and Claire on the shelf. Good, let her rot. The news showed her mugshot that night, Julia's perfect blonde hair tangled, her eyes red and furious. Tessa's follow-up article sealed it. Golden Daughter Falls, Julia Thompson charged with theft and fraud. I popped a bottle of champagne, the bubbles sharp on my tongue, and toasted the screen alone. Robert's empire didn't just collapse, it burned. The IRS tore through his accounts, the bank repossessed their cars, their mansion, even Margaret's precious antique jewelry. A mutual friend told me she'd had a breakdown in a grocery store, sobbing over a cart of discount canned goods while strangers stared. I didn't feel a shred of pity, only a quiet, fierce satisfaction. Their high society friends scattered like roaches, their name a punchline at every Charleston dinner party. Matt cut them off completely, or so Claire heard. He'd moved to Raleigh, started over, no longer their pawn. I didn't care enough to check, but it wasn't over, not quite. A month later I got a call from a new voice, Mr. Carter Green, a slick-talking lawyer with a southern accent thick as molasses. Ms. Tran, he drawled, I represent the Thompson family. They're willing to settle quietly. Name your price to drop this mess. I stood on my balcony, the city lights sprawling below, and laughed into the phone. Settle? They've got nothing left to offer. Tell Robert he can shove it. Green's tone hardened. You're making enemies, Ms. Tran. They won't forget this. I grinned, the wind tugging at my hair. Good. I'd hate to be forgettable. I hung up, my heart racing with a mix of defiance and unease. Green's threat lingered, a shadow on the edge of my victory, but I pushed it down. I'd won. Freed myself, torched their world, built something new. The Thompsons were broken, clawing at the ruins of their lives, while I stood tall, unshaken. Or so I told myself. That night, I dreamed of Julia's furious eyes, Robert's clenched fists, Margaret's trembling hands reaching for me through the dark. I woke sweating, the city humming outside, and wondered if revenge ever truly ends, or if it just plants seeds for the next fight. Looking back, I learned something raw and real. Trust is a luxury, and family isn't always blood. It's the ones who stand with you when the knives come out. Claire, Harris, even Tessa in her own way. They were my army. The Thompsons taught me that power isn't wealth or status. It's knowing where the bodies are buried and having the guts to dig them up. I'm not the same Lynn who walked into that mansion, naive and outnumbered. I'm sharper now, harder, and I'll never let anyone corner me again. So here I am, glass in hand, the city alive below me, their ashes still settling. Maybe Robert's plotting from his jail cell. Maybe Julia's cursing my name from hers. Maybe Margaret's praying for a miracle that'll never come. Maybe Green's right, and they'll try to strike back someday. Let them. I'll be ready. What about you? Ever had to burn a bridge to save yourself? Drop your story below? I'd love to hear how you fought back. Or just tell me. Who'd you root for here? Me or the chaos? Either way, thanks for watching this unfold. Stick around. Life's got more twists coming.